we're now at the end of the day here, last seminar of the day. And I don't know about you, but HR, branding, it's all very interesting and very important, but barrel-aged beer is just a little bit more important. So I'm pretty jazzed about this panel and the people that we have here and their expertise and what they're going to be sharing with you today. So first off, everybody can hear me? Volume's okay? I got to eat the mic even more, hey? Oh man, that's so weird. Okay, that's better, I guess. So I'm going to introduce our panelists. I got a ton of questions for them, and then there should be plenty of time in the end for you folks to ask questions as well. So our first panelist, there at the far end, is Kyle Stewart. Kyle has been a brewer with Parallel 49. For the last 4 years, and he recently took over the role of Barrel Program Manager. Since releasing their first Russian Imperial Stout 4 years ago, which I'm pleased to say I have a full vertical of in my cellar, Parallel 49 have been continuously expanding their barrel program, producing nearly every style of barrel-aged beer out there. Since assuming his role as program manager, Kyle has overseen the release of several barrel-aged beers and is looking to put his own unique stamp on what is already a solid program. Next we have Brent Mills. Brent is the brewmaster of Delta's Four Winds Brewing, for those of you who don't know. Since opening Four Winds with his dad Greg and his brother Adam in 2013, Brent's beers and brewery have won numerous local, national, and international awards, including Four Winds' recognition as Canada's best brewery at the 2015 Canadian Brewing Awards. Yeah. And then his Nectarous Dry Hop Sour being recognized as Beer of the Year at the 2016 Canadian Beer Awards. Yeah. We all love Four Winds. His barrel aging and bottle conditioning really set Four Winds apart when they first opened, and in my humble opinion, went a long way to introducing the local market to barrel-aged beers, especially farmhouse ales and saisons. We're all really happy to have Brent here today. And finally, we have Kevin Martin. Kevin is the master blender at Portland's iconic Cascade Brewing Barrel House. Which, for anyone in the room who doesn't make multiple visits to their Southeast Portland tap room every year like me, Cascade is the producer of some of the most solid, delicious, and innovative and award-winning beers in the US, in my humble opinion. Fittingly, considering Cascade's focus on using local wine barrels and regional fruit, Kevin got his start in the wine industry about 10 years ago, before moving over to beer at Laurelwood and then on to Cascade. I know we're all really excited to have Kevin here today and very appreciative that he managed to bring some of his beers here to sample. And I understand there's certain limits on you guys trying his beer, but they're not on mine. So I don't make the rules, that's just how it goes. So please welcome Kevin, Brent, and Kyle. All right. So, starting from the beginning of a barrel program, what considerations do you think you need to make regarding training, process, and equipment when launching a barrel program? And you guys can just jump in whenever you want.
As far as equipment goes, you can start it off very simple. You need wood in the form of a barrel, which is probably the cheapest source. And then from there, you can literally just fill barrels with a hose coming off of your fermenter. That's as simple as it gets. That's where we started our first dozen barrels filled off of a fermenter. We dosed it with Brent Brooks directly in, and that was it. We had zero investment outside of the wood that we bought, which was $45 a barrel, plus the racks, which were $58 a rack. So yeah, very little investment in that sense, but the time is the investment for sure. Waiting to make sure that the beer is tasty or not tasty, don't release it, that sort of thing.
Well, there's a lot involved in launching a barrel program, and I think that every brewery has to kind of ask themselves what the scope, the depth and scope of their program is going to be. And that's going to determine your equipment needs, your training needs. But certainly, if you've never worked with barrels before, I mean, I am biased coming from a wine background, but if you're looking for a good resource and how to work with barrels, what equipment's necessary in terms of getting, cleaning barrels, getting beer in and out, I'd highly recommend talking to some of your, local wineries and seeing if you can get some good tips. You know, training, there's a lot that you can, you know, there's a lot that you want to be knowledgeable of before you start, in terms of how to stack barrels, inventory, best practices, you know, gases, all kinds of things that you want to use. But so a good healthy amount of research up front, I think, is really the best way to go. And I think, again, ask yourselves what it is that you want to accomplish, and then look at what equipment and training and, you know, what was the other one, facility or something.
Yeah, facility.
Yeah.
So what you touched on this, getting barrels. What was the process like for all of you getting barrels for your brewery? Was it any certain kinds of wood or previous uses harder to get than others? Where did you get them? And what are you looking for when you're buying barrels?
Sure, I guess I'll start with this one. There's fortunately lots of options for sourcing barrels these days. There's a lot of brokers out there that you can pretty much kind of take your pick of whatever they have on hand, which is great. But still, probably the best option is still to kind of contact your local either spirit producers or wine producers and really see what's out there. They're going to have the best options for you in terms of what's been recently dumped, what's really fresh, and what's easy to use. And that's probably the best place to start. If you're looking for something really specific, maybe you go through a broker and see what they have. But otherwise, you know, we're really fortunate being in BC. There are tons of options right now for finding locally sourced barrels, and they're probably the best place to start.
Yeah, I mean, is there any kind that's harder to get than others? Like if you want to do something tequila barrel aged or sherry.
If you have a line, there's one that I've been looking for. Maybe you guys can help me out. Delwinnie does a barrel ferment on their wash, and they do aging in Douglas fir barrels. And I would love to get my hands on those. So if you have them, maybe somebody can drop me a line afterward.
So we are fortunate in Oregon to have a lot of wineries at our disposal. So we primarily use used Pinot and Chardonnay barrels. I think getting them directly from the source, so distiller or winery, is your best bet, especially if you can coordinate with them on the day that they're emptying them. If you can have a truck there the next day to pick them up and fill them, that's your ideal scenario. That's not always logistically possible. But if you can be directly in touch with the people working with them, then you're likely to get more healthy barrels. Going through brokerages is necessary if you want to get a hold of a lot or you don't have access to spirit or distilleries or wineries in your area. But brokers, you know, I think that they're doing tremendous things. The concern is that you know, they're not in production, and so sometimes the barrels can sit longer than they should. They may not be gassed or sulfured in the way that they should be to keep them healthy. We've bought lots of barrels from brokers that show up, you know, highly acidic, you know, lots of vinegar characters, or that just we're in a bit rough shape that we had to put a lot of time and effort into turning them around. And so it's not to say don't buy through a broker, but ask the right questions when you are working with a broker. You know, there's a seasonality to wine barrels. Your best bet is actually coming up here. The wine harvest is just about to come to a close here in November. And that's when wineries are assessing how many barrels they bought, how many they have on hand, and what excess ones they didn't fill this year. And that's when they have a glut that you can take advantage of and get a good price on a bunch of barrels all at once. So check with your winemakers, you know, after they've been filled or emptied, usually in the fall after the harvest, and then in the summer, spring when they're emptying them for bottling. Those are great times to get good deals. Also be wary of your shipping times. If you're getting them, say, from California, you're going to get them from further away. Avoid buying your barrels in the summertime. There's nothing worse than having a barrel sit on a truck for several weeks at 90-degree temperatures. It's just not good for your wood. They're going to dry out and leak when you get them. So try to do most of your barrel purchasing, if you can, in the cooler seasons. That would be my advice, and make sure that they're just treated well before they're loaded on the truck. That's just a few items that we look for.
Very cool. So yeah, I have a lot of questions, and you know, some of this stuff for the brewers in the room might be a little trite, might be a little old information. For some folks, it may not be. So you know, the use of bourbon barrels for imperial stouts and wine barrels for saisons and certain fruit sours is super well known. What kind of barrels are best for certain styles, in your opinion? And what combinations really excite you as a brewer? Is there a combination you're particularly excited about these days? What haven't you been able to try that you'd like to try? You mentioned the Scotch barrels, but
It's a fantasy. I really don't think there's a single set. I think, for a long time it was that kind of bourbon barrel combination with imperial stouts and those kind of strong ales. And I think we're starting to see that come to an end, and I think people are looking for kind of more curious combinations. One thing that's really interesting is those freshly dumped wine barrels, and then reintroducing maybe some of the fruit that fermented that wine in the first place back into it, so you can kind of get these kind of double layers of the kind of residual flavors and aromas left in the wood, and then kind of the fresher fruit aromas. It's a lot of fun. You can see in the Northwest we get a lot of Gewürztraminer and Riesling, so you get that kind of heavy perfume from the grapes, and then you get this kind of the French oak and the spice from there. So it can be kind of a cool combination. But in terms of styles, I think that anything can be matched. It's just a matter of finding the right style that matches the intensity of the wood, and the wood ranges pretty dramatically. So you kind of have to keep that in mind as kind of like that fifth ingredient in kind of recipe development.
Kevin, what do you think? Or Brent?
Yeah, no, I was just going to touch on that, being the sense that you can use them the same way you pair beer and food, is like you can go in conjunction, something to complement it, but you can also contrast the flavors as well, as long as it's thoughtful. But yeah, like for instance, Kyle touched on an idea of fermenting beer in a wine barrel with the grapes that were once in there, or next season's grapes. Like that's something that we're actually working on right now, which is pretty sweet, and I hopefully see that more often. I don't know, you guys do a bit of that?
We do, yeah. We are fortunate, we have a fairly large barrel program, and so we're able to play around with a lot of different ideas and experiment with many types of barrels and beer combinations. I would say one of the ones that we're most excited about right now, that we really only started in earnest in the last couple of years, is working with new oak, not coming from a winery or distillery, but actually working directly with the cooperage of the barrel maker. We've been working with Seguin Moreau. They've got a great program down in California where they're building barrels, coopering barrels, and new wood. As many of you may already know, it can be very aggressive as a single barrel. But from where we're coming from at Cascade, we're looking at things through a blending lens. And if you're going to fill, say, 10 oak barrels with a beer, say triple or something, that's what we've been experimenting with this new wood. You might want to fill 2 of them into new barrels and 8 of them into more neutral barrels, and then kind of work on your ratios to find a balance that works so the wood's not just crushing the beer. In those individual barrels, as single components, they're a bit out of balance, but when you blend them together, they can be really nice. We did a project called Sang du Chêne, Blood of the Oak, a few, I guess, earlier in the year. And that featured a lot of new wood, and there's some really cool options. You can play around with toast levels, the region of your, where you're getting your oak from, whether it's French, Hungarian, American. So there's some really exciting analytics going on as well. There's some new styles where they're actually taking oak from all different forests, and they're doing more of a chemical analysis on it. And rather than trying to say all this wood is from the Limousin, forest in France, they're saying all of this wood came from a lot of different forests, but is chemically, more precisely akin to one another to build a barrel of individualized staves that have been selected to have this one character, might be vanillin contents, or where you can actually buy barrels specific to what you expect to get out of them. So it's a really new technology, but talk to your coopers. There's a lot of reps. I know I can speak for Oregon. There's a lot of reps because we have a big wine region there, but I'm sure you do in this area as well. So reach out to some cooperage reps and see what they've got going on, because there's a lot of really cool things cooking in the coopering world.
How much do those barrels cost?
A lot, usually it can be 800 to 1,000 just for the barrel, plus shipping costs from France or California. If you get American oak, they can be significantly less. I would recommend starting there before you make the investment. But primarily we work with American oak because it's more affordable. And if we do want some French character, we'll actually just get the heads, French heads with American staves, something like that. You can mix and match. There's all kinds of options. So again, budget yourselves. Think of these things as long-term investments. It's not just the first fill that you're getting your money out of. You're actually getting it out of the second, third, fourth, and fifth fills. So there's a certain way you can kind of depreciate that if you're trying to appease your accounting staff and justifying a large barrel purchase.
Okay, super general question. Talk to us about the use of wood versus the use of stainless steel.
Typically, we'll produce a beer in stainless and later move it into wood in order for bacteria and other yeasts to eat away at other sugars in the beer. The reason we use the wood is that it's a vessel outside of our regular production. It also brings in some tannin from the wood, potentially what was in there before, and oxygen ingress, which can feed some of the yeast and bacteria to develop further flavors. We've also done fermentations in the wood, in clean wood, and produced like traditional classic ales, open fermented in wood. I don't know if that is necessary to do it in wood, but I think it kind of gives it a bit of a unique flavor. You pull in some tannin when you have a bit of heat and friction in there. Compared to steel, you're going to have a pretty clean, controlled fermentation.
I think there's an element of just kind of letting the beer do what it wants when you work with wood. Stainless has a kind of a mastery, whereas oak you kind of have to let things go constantly. I think is probably your experience. Yeah. At every turn you're kind of letting something happen on its own, which is it's exciting. I think most people get interested in oak, not for the kind of known quantities of it, but for the kind of uncertainties. So I think it's fun ultimately. I think, and that's why people gravitate toward it. They see it's a space to be creative. It's a space to do something that hasn't been done before or in a different way. So I think it's hard to do that in stainless a little bit. So it's a kind of a space to work in.
Yeah, I think the beauty of wood is that if you do I speak in barrels and units that don't make any sense. But, you can take a 30-barrel batch and break it into 16 different individual barrels, and you've gone from one homogeneous beer to 16 individual beers, which is really the great benefit of oak or wood. I would also say in terms of the considerations, we might want to look at when to use stainless, when to use wood. Ask yourself, what's the soil load going to be? What's the sediment or particulate load or solids load? So we do all of our primary in stainless, just because all of that, chunky matter that you're going to get at the bottom of your conical is best not to be in a barrel. Could show up as off flavors later down the line. So what we do is all of our soil-heavy fermentations occur in stainless, and that includes a lot of our fruit fermentations. We bought some stainless fruit tanks, but certainly there are smaller vessels out there that you can clean more easily. So if we're going to do several thousand pounds of cherries or apricots or peaches, and we need to separate the beer off of those solids, we prefer to do that in stainless than in barrels, only because it's much easier to clean. We try to keep our wood as pristine and pretty much only bright beer and bacteria going into those barrels. We'll barrel age for 8 months in wood first, and then when it comes time to fruit, we'll actually do that combination of fruit and beer into a stainless vessel after the barrel aging period. Not in every case, but in many cases, it kind of depends on our tank schedule. So certainly we do some barrel fruiting, but it just makes things a lot more difficult to get ingredients in and out. So do your soil heavy load items in stainless, and then do your long-term aging, clean aging in wood would be my advice.
Okay. The next question is about fruit. And for Kevin, obviously we'll have a lot to add about this. But any pitfalls and best practices to the use of fruit? And again, for the other two panelists, because you don't almost exclusively make beer with fruit, what beer have you made with fruit that you're particularly proud of? That really kind of, you executed, you got exactly what you want out of it?
So for fruit, we see fruit as, I mean, it's a really cool expression. We work with all whole fruit, fresh fruit as much as we possibly can. If it's not fresh, it's either dried or it's been pressed. But we don't use any aseptic products or any concentrates or anything like that. That's just part of our philosophy. But I would say for your best friend when processing fresh fruit or whole fruit is dry ice. If you are concerned during the processing, whether you're pitting or crushing or weighing it out in buckets or adding it to your barrels, dry ice is a beautiful tool to help keep oxygen away because it's, as many of you know, it's a solidified form of carbon dioxide, which will sublimate as you're working. So if you're filling a bucket of cherries that might not make it to a barrel for a few minutes while you're crushing more, throw a few chips of dry ice in there and you've got a little bit of preservative time. Same thing when you're putting fruit into barrels. You can add a little bit of dry ice into a barrel while you fruit and you've got this positive push of CO2 gas coming out of the bunghole during that period of time. Set yourself up for good process. You set your stations up and have clear defined roles. This is our washing station, this is our crushing station, this is our weighing station, and this is our addition station. You might have people running across both, but you want to have nice clear directions on how you want that to proceed. The other thing is don't assume that all of your fruit is at the same level of ripeness. If you're getting apricots or you're getting cherries or peaches or whatever, I keep using those examples because that's what we just finished doing this summer. Don't assume they're all going to be the same level of ripeness. In the same box, you'll get one that's green and one that's nearly rotting. You don't want to put those green ones in there, so give yourself some space. We build racks temporarily during the season to put any unripe fruit on and just let that ripen for a few days until it's right to go into the beer. Otherwise you wind up with these weird vegetal green flavors that you just don't want. So, give yourself some room to ripen the fruit because you can't expect that your produce supplier or your farmer is going to have the same eye that you will. In most cases, your supplier is trying to sell grocery store ripeness, which is, needs several days to ripen in the store and then a few days to ripen on your counter in your kitchen. That's not what you want in your beer. You want something that's kind of been almost over-ripened, but before it rots. So, it's a very sweet spot for fruit. And if you have a supplier who's not able to get that for exactly, take it upon yourself to have a system in place to hit that level of ripeness. There's a lot we could touch on with fruit, but I'll shut up about
it. I'll talk a little bit about a beer that we did once. Well, we've done it twice, but released it once. It's called Pomona, and it's stone fruit sour. So it's a sour wit beer, aged in a foeder, and has 2 additions of fruit based on ripeness. And the first addition was apricot, second was nectarine. And the idea for this beer was essentially to make a beer as close to like a fuzzy peach kind of candy sour beer as possible. And a lot of times when you're working with wood and you're working with fruit and you're working with bacteria and Brett cultures, you don't always dial it in first try. But last season we got some really nice fruit from our farmer in Karamias. Apricots came in perfectly ripe, and about 4 weeks later I think the nectarines came in delicious. Like we ate probably a third of them and then threw the rest in the foeder. But we gave it a few more months and decided and packaged it when it was ready. But it was just one of those things where it really came together as like our first time going at this style of beer, and it worked out really well. But just the acid content of this beer matched the sweetness of the fruit really well, and it just turned out really good. And we're going to be releasing it again in a few months, so keep an eye out for it.
Do I have to get online now, or can I? Actually, we've got a beer that I was pretty excited about this summer. We got some very fresh cherries from the Okanagan, and it's actually, Kevin, you made a good point about knowing what where your fruit's coming from and what kind of condition it's going to arrive in. This is the first time that we've really used fresh whole fruit, and it came in beautifully. It had been harvested like the night before, and they drove it down to Vancouver, and it was just like every single piece of fruit was ready to go. It was beautiful. So, one thing that I did learn is that make sure you have labor ready, which is really strange, a thing that you might not expect, but farmers don't work on your schedule, and they're gonna pick their fruit when they want and when it's ready. So you kind of have to be ready to handle it right away. So it's something you don't get a pallet of fruit and then sit it somewhere, and then when you have time next week, get to it. You have to be ready to receive it. So there's a little bit of flexibility, but it's kind of fun to see. This particular project is interesting because this was a unsprayed organic orchard that we're pretty confident that the fruit's going to be great just on its own, and it made a big difference just to see kind of the flavor and the ripeness, and the fruit was ready to go. It's going to make a great beer. Didn't have to worry about processing it quite as much as you would with grocery store product. You don't have to your PAA wash or whatever you choose to do. You can kind of take it a bit easier and kind of let the fruit express itself on its own rather than trying to purify it or sanitize it in some weird way. So that's a beer that we're really excited about. So hopefully by maybe now, since Brent advertised one beer, I guess I get to do one too. So hopefully we'll see that by December. You didn't give a date, but I gave a date. Yeah.
Okay, what about moving on to the life cycle of barrels? First use, third use, fourth use. How does the use of barrels over time impact their use and their usefulness to you? And obviously it's going to be different case by case, types of wood, types of previous uses, but how many times can you go through a barrel, and when do you know it's time to retire it?
I don't know if I don't think there's a definite answer to that life cycle. Obviously you're going to, for example, a spirit barrel, you're going to notice in the first 3 uses, you're going to get most of your kind of spirit contribution. Most of the kind of more aggressive flavors are going to show up in that kind of the first 3 uses, maybe even a little further than that, depending on how long your extraction time is. But there's really, a well-maintained barrel can last an awful long time. Certainly, you can get into scraping the insides and exposing fresh wood. You can do a lot of things to make sure your barrels should be able to last as long as you're interested in using them, providing you don't have any kind of microbial problems. But that's something that might be unrelated to the length of use. But there's really no limit, and it's about matching the beers you're using for that kind of wherever that barrel is. If you're looking for something that's going to contribute a lot of those kind of heavy vanilla and kind of lactones, like flavors and aromas, obviously you're going to need a young barrel. If you're looking for something more like Brent kind of mentioned about, a home for a mixed culture and microoxygenation, a barrel that's seen 5 or 6 turns is still going to have lots. It's going to still have lots to contribute, and especially with the long-term kind of aging that you get with those mixed culture beers, you're going to see a lot of the tannins and structures still come through even after many, many uses.
Let's see. I agree. There's absolutely no right answer, or I should say, there's no limit to how many uses you can get. We rated on the same criteria. Any off microbial properties, particularly with us, we get Acetobacter or Pediococcus, which we aren't looking for in our beers. We are trying to get a clean lacto flavor, so anything that doesn't express that typically gets booted out of our cellar. And then structural integrity. I think it's really important. We stack our barrels 4 and 5 high. Some people go higher than that. If there's any structural question whatsoever about the barrel itself, it's out because we can't risk a stack going over. And that's never happened for us, but something to always keep in mind. Just don't assume that your barrel is going to be in good shape. Take a look at your heads, make sure there's no bowing. So structural soundness and making sure that it holds liquid, of course. The most common place a barrel goes bad, I think, is not in the areas where the beer is in contact, but usually in that very top stave where the bunghole is when you're trying to remove beer. If you're using pressure to remove beer, a lot of times that very top stave can bow out of place, and then you get leaks right in that top stave, and that's usually the most frustrating part of a barrel, and that's when we get leaks there, we also get rid of them. But that said, just because a barrel is old in your cellar doesn't mean it doesn't have value. We rate our barrels A, B, C, and D, A being its first use, B being its second use, C being its first use with fruit, and D being its multiple uses with fruit. And that's beneficial to us because we like to experiment with a lot of different ingredients. And if you take something like ginger or coffee or these ingredients that can really leach onto the wood that have high oil contents, or if you're doing chili peppers or something, that you'll never get out of that barrel ever again. Use your oldest barrels. What's something that you're willing to either dedicate to we do a honey ginger lime project. We have those barrels that are dedicated just to ginger and lime because they take on so much character. Once they're no longer good, then we get rid of them and we commission a new ginger lime barrel that's probably been used for other things prior. So those older barrels are really great ones to experiment with and to try ingredients that are not going to come out of the wood so easily. And then the last thing I'll just say is that the first use barrels usually are the slowest in terms of souring for us or bacterial fermentations because they don't have a previous culture. The more we use a barrel, the faster we see souring occur. So if you want to see a project, I don't like to brew or blend based on sales deadlines, but that's not a reality for everybody on a commercial scale. So if you need to see a beer sour more quickly, use an older barrel rather than a newer barrel. So there's certainly great uses for older barrels in your cellar. Just make sure they're in good shape.
Okay, awesome. So obviously Kevin can definitely answer this next question, but your other two can absolutely jump in and give us some examples. Using the example of one of your beers, walk us through the process of blending. What do you do when you're blending?
Blending starts on a theoretical level, and I think it's really important to have creative, intelligent people on your team that you can kind of have a rap session with. I'm very fortunate to work with Ron Gansberg, our brewmaster, who's this extraordinarily creative person who loves to think outside of the box, and we have these long rap sessions about what exactly we want to do. But get an end goal in mind first. A lot of times we'll say, all right, we want to make a beer that is very, very dry, that has X ingredient and Y ingredient that's aged for this long, and we're shooting this kind of a level of sourness. And it can be in coarse terms. You don't have to define a pH or anything. We don't. We never define pH or ABV. We define flavor profiles and descriptions that we're looking for. And usually that's within the context of we look at our beers as a portfolio, looking at across the board everything that we produce and saying where are their gaps? What do we want to make we haven't done before? So on a theoretical level, we might say, all right, we want port barrels, we want double red ales, we want to do Marion berries, and we want some brightening tone, and we don't know what that's going to be yet. Maybe it's going to be a citrus or a spice, but we'll dial that in. So that's the theoretical level. So we try to keep, we have a benefit of a large cellar, so, not every barrel that we make gets a project assigned to it right away. If we're going to brew blondes, we might brew a high gravity blonde and a low gravity blonde, one that's more likely to become more sour, one that's likely to retain a little bit more residual sweetness, so that we've got both of those things in our back pocket, and it gives us a lot of blending power, so that when it does come time to make the blend, we give our staff these work orders that say blend up, say we're going to do 100 oak barrels into a single project. We'll usually say blend these 30 together and stop. And then we do sensory analysis. And then we decide what course we're on. If it's in the right direction, we keep going. If it's not, we re-look at what barrels are available to us, and then we'll blend up to 50% and then stop and do it again and blend up to 75%. So we're constantly monitoring these things as we're blending. I think that's really important, and asking yourselves, the most difficult question I think you ask yourself as a blender is what is not there. You can be focused sometimes on what is there, and the acidity is not there, or the sweetness is not there, or the oak presence is not there, and those are the things that you want to really be thinking about. And then in the interest of not going on too long, anytime you have an ingredient that's going to absolutely be crucial to a blend, do it in high concentration. If you're targeting 2 pounds per barrel or 2 pounds per gallon or whatever, 2 pounds per whatever liter or whatever you guys do. go double that in your actual fruit tank or your fruit barrel, and then that way you're blending down. You're always blending down as opposed to blending up. The very last barrel, so we always start with the most highest character, highest ingredient fruit portion first. Then we blend down from there, and then we know when we hit our stopping point. We always mock blend as well. Always mock blend on a very, very small scale first. Say, okay, we think we can take this 150 barrel blend up to 180 using just like a stock red ale that's going to dilute these flavors. But before we actually start sending that beer, let's mock it up first on a much, much smaller scale to confirm our suspicions before we actually go for it. So always blend, always do concentrated process, and then blend down with dilution. And if you can have a few beers on hand that give you some variety, that's going to give you a lot more blending power when the time comes.
Yeah, blending is very challenging. I think you have the luxury of a very large cellar relative to most people who are going to be working with wood. Anybody in this room probably has a fairly limited access to what kind of barrels they can choose from. But that doesn't, you should blend to finished product, not to volume. There's no way to shortcut that. I think if you have 6 barrels and 3 of them are the best together, and that's kind of what you live with. And I think, it's really important to kind of constantly monitor what that blend might look like. Those kind of just trials of, 30 mils at a time of going, okay, I think this is here. That's going to be really helpful. But I think one of the best things to do, especially if you're a small producer and you're not going to have a wide range, is build in variety into even your small lots. If that means pitching different secondary microbes or doing something per barrel on an individual scale, that might give you the option of having a little, you've got your 6 barrels, but 3 of them have a different kind of microbial blend, and they might get some different contributions, and you can kind of pick and choose based on that, rather than just hoping that, your 6 barrels all taste great and you can put them all together and sell it right like that.
Now, let's talk about cultures, the use of different cultures. Is there any particular combination of beer, fruit, culture that you're particularly excited about these days? What are some that your brewery uses?
We're always experimenting with different cultures and yeasts. We typically stick to different forms of Brent and different forms of lactobacillus, but we have used pediococcus in the beer you're drinking right now, actually, the quadrennial. But something we're not too familiar with. But I just find that the kind of flavors that Brent can produce combined with the acidity that you get from the lactobacillus just make a nice combo. And typically we'll dose or we'll ferment with lacto and Brent same time and kind of categorize or monitor the pH and total acidity as it goes and keep an eye on things until we kind of hit target acidities, and we'll just at that point kind of keep on monitoring it and package it when it's tasting the way we want. I don't know. That's lost my train of thought there.
Okay. So at Cascade, we work with a proprietary house culture of lactobacillus. That's really been the definitive. That's kind of the one constant in what we try to do. I mean, every barrel, base beer, fruit type, blend strategy, all those things change. The only thing that doesn't is our culture. So I may not be the best person to speak with, exciting new waves of culture out there. The only thing that I will say is that we really do enjoy wild fermentation of fruit. We don't do spontaneous open top stuff, but we typically, as I mentioned before, we will let our beers sour with our lactoculture first so that has a chance to get a real grip on the base beers. Then when it comes time to fruit, we let whatever's on the fruit actually perform the fermentation. And so in that regard, I think our fruited beers are kind of the semi-wild. We find figs have a lot more Brett on them than other fruits. We've found that blueberries can be prone to acetobacter sometimes. It's just every fruit has their own kind of microclimate that likes to go at them. And in that regard, we do have a lot of fun right now. So many of you are tasting the Vitis Noble that we did as a Chardonnay must beer hybrid. And for that one, right now that we have a new tank of Chardonnay fermenting in our cellar as we speak. And we also have some Pinot Noir ferments that we were just starting to kick off this week. A couple of those Pinots took off right away. Some of them didn't take off. And we start to get concerned about oxidation or other, ethyl acetate and other weird kind of flavors and aromas. So we actually took some of that fermenting Chardonnay and threw it into the Pinot, and now they're starting. I just spoke with one of our cellar managers earlier today, and he said they're starting to kick off. So we do enjoy, if we have something that's going really healthily and we're happy with it, we'll use that to inoculate something else. And that can be a lot of fun. We don't know exactly what it is. We can look at it and say, oh, there's wild yeasts on here in some of our culture, and it's this mixed bag. But it is a lot of fun to let them go at their own pace. That said, if they're not going the way that you want them to, we have, you can throw them in the cooler, let them kind of stall out, warm them back up, or turn on your glycol or whatever, warm them back up, and then repitch, a yeast culture if things are just going horribly, horribly awry. But hopefully that's not the case.
Yeah, the answer to questions about mixed cultures is generally just kind of maybe, I don't know. We don't use anything in particular. We've kind of started off with a fairly engineered approach to kind of mixed culture beers, and they haven't necessarily given the complexity that we really wanted. Now I feel like we've kind of flipped the other way and are starting to let things kind of go on their own, which has its own challenges and doesn't really answer all the questions every single time. So I think that you just kind of have to explore multiple cultures. I think it's best to come with an open mind about trying things and seeing where they go, because when we're dealing with Brettanomyces brux, that's a pretty wide category, and you might have a different brux than I've got, and your brux might behave differently in your conditions than mine. So the idea that it's kind of like, oh, I tried this particular culture, I tried this particular microbe once, and I didn't really like how it came out. There's a lot more to find with these particular organisms. They don't have the same, we're not going to master them, we're not going to know them clearly. Only through kind of multiple uses will you ever figure out what you've got. And sometimes you think you know what you've got, and then you realize much later down the road that the actual genetic sequencing turns out to be something really different. So it's better to kind of keep an open mind about your mixed cultures and let them come to you.
Awesome, thank you. So now moving on to a super unsexy topic, barrel maintenance. Considering how important it is, some people disagree that's a sexy topic. That's really sexy. Considering how important it is to avoid contamination and ensure you get the most out of your investment in your barrels, obviously super important topic. So do you have any best practices and tips to share on barrel maintenance?
Buy some tools, get comfortable making simple fixes. There's lots of barrels have problems. Many of them will leak over the course of their lives, and just get in there and figure out how to fix them. You won't be able to fix all of them. We're not all going to be Coopers by the end of the day, but there's a lot of fixes you can make. So I definitely recommend, if you're interested in getting a barrel program started or expanding it, spend some money on the tools. Get a hoop driver, get a heavy mallet, get comfortable with an awl, learn how to use spiles, do these kind of basic elements of fixing leaks, and you're going to be suddenly very happy with not having beer all over the floor to clean up every day is probably the first step, let alone getting the investment back.
I actually asked Carlos to bring this topic up because this is something that we've made a few mistakes in. We kind of take the wood for granted, and we have in the past anyways, where we've added beer, pulled the beer out, cleaned the barrel, and prepped it for filling it maybe sometime down the line, later to find out that wood is now destroyed. So something we've invested in over the last year was an ozonator in order to keep the wood somewhat sanitary. We avoided using sulfur, as we've had bad experiences with sulfur in beer, and it doesn't taste very good and really kind of nasty stuff. But yeah, we were working on practices where essentially there's lots of ways to keep your wood healthy and clean. But the best practice really is to fill it the day you empty it. And that's something we've learned. And going forward, that just takes practice and planning to make sure you got beer ready to go in there when the barrel is empty. That's probably my best advice on barrels as we're struggling a little bit with keeping them healthy, keep them filled, keep them fresh.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. We have kind of a floating inventory of empty barrels that can float, anywhere between 100 to 200 barrels at any one time. We aren't able to fill them all at once. So we do use sulfur. I guess I would say absolutely a hoop driver and mallet, first of all, some of the most important tools you have in your barrel cellar. A barrel washer is another one. Make the investment. Spraying it out with just a hose is just not really, it's not going to do for you what you want it to do. So, long-term aging, if we know it's not going to get filled for several weeks or even months, we burn sulfur sticks. We find that it works really well. It's very inexpensive. Never burn a sulfur stick in a spirit barrel. It will explode like a bomb. Never seen it, but I've heard horror stories. But everything else, wine barrels and barrels that have been used several times are just fine to burn sulfur sticks in, and we found that with a cold water rinse and purging with CO2, you knock the vast majority of any sulfur flavors or aromas out. Hydrate your barrels. If they've been empty for a little while, hydrate them before you fill them, or else you will have more leaks than are necessary. Just put them on their heads and fill them with water. Fill the head with water. It takes maybe 3 or 4 gallons. And what's happening there is that the wood that, the end of the oak staves that's exposed, there's channels that run all the way through those staves, and they actually draw water down through the entire stave and swell them and fill. So if you just hydrate the heads, you're still hydrating all of the staves on the exterior of the barrel. So it's a very, very effective tool. We have an outside area that with just like Costco tenting outside, where the week prior to filling barrels, we run them out. We put water on one side, 24 hours, flip it. Water on the other side, 24 hours, flip it. We might do that twice. And then we bring it in, rinse it, purge it with CO2, fill it. We use a steamer afterwards. We do cold rinses, and then we do steam to kind of pasteurize as best we can a barrel prior to sulfuring. I think it's important, if you can't steam, hot water soaks work. Let me think here, what else? I would say just a quick rinse and a steam or hot water, and then burn a sulfur stick, or you can do a citric sulfur solution. Those work really well. And just a quick search, Google search citric sulfur solution for barrels, you'll find a lot of suggestions out there on what to do, and those are my main tips for barrel maintenance. If you do have leaks, toothpicks, wax, and a hammer work great. Use wood to plug wood. It really works pretty well. The cellulose, I think it's cellulose. Yeah. So basically, if you have a leak between two staves, take a toothpick and just like a very fine chisel and just knock a toothpick in there. Put a little bit of wax over it. Take a torch, melt that wax a little bit. Knock it in a little bit more, a little more wax, melt it a little bit. Seals up real quick. So a little bit of wax, some toothpicks, and a little torch. You can plug almost any leak you run into.
Since we're giving the inside tips, I've got one. I got one for everybody. So we bought some large fooders a few years ago, and as you get used to working with wood, maybe sometimes you've done things that you regret later on. And one of the things we did let them dry out a little too much, and it was a little bit of work to get them back into working order. And one of the staves at the very top, so you're imagining it's 10 feet tall. And at the very top, it's very hard to get liquid up there. And as you keep beer in there, it kind of evaporates out, and that top section gets pretty dry. Kind of like that the bung stave in a barrel. Anyway, we could not figure out how to get this thing to seal, just kind of seeping permanently. And me being a person who thinks he knows everything, had all the tricks. I tried the toothpicks, it did not work. But reading every single kind of reference to leaky barrels on the internet. I think I've covered all of them by now. Is one of them was an old winemaker trick of calcium carbonate and garlic, and I thought that's stupid. That'll never work. It worked in like 2 minutes, and it stopped the leak. Like I put it on and I couldn't. It just stopped completely. And so be humble. Yeah, that's maybe the lesson.
Can you explain that a little further, Kelsey?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So my concept was that it was the calcium carbonate was really what was going to work. So I put that on and caked it on, and it actually worked pretty well and would hold it. But after a couple of days, I noticed the leak would kind of start seeping through and kind of washing through the calcium carbonate. And so I finally gave in and said, okay, I'll try the garlic. So we went into the restaurant's kitchen and grabbed a clove of garlic, and I just kind of crushed it up with the calcium carbonate and just kind of smeared the clove over the gap in the staves, and it like instantly sealed. It was, yeah, I learned my lesson. So try that. If you've got a leak, go for it. It actually works really well.
And we've done that with the garlic trick as well, and it does work. I still recommend the torch though, and then your entire cellar smells like marinara sauce. It's delicious.
Man, I was so wrong about that being an unsexy topic. So as a brewery grows and their barrel inventory grows, obviously there's going to be some kind of growing pains. Any tips for managing your barrel inventory as your cellar grows? Things you found that has worked for you, whether it's a program or just
keep really good records, even if you're small, even if you're just getting started. Be really thorough about the record keeping. It makes it easy to keep track of how many generations a barrel's seen and what it's seen, what kind of microbes it's seen. You'll be much happier down the road, and you go, well, what was it? What was in that? I don't quite remember. You think you'll remember it, you never do. The other thing is, I think Brent kind of mentioned it earlier, is kind of relevant to the topic of maintenance, but keep a schedule and really try to work on it. It's hard. Barrel beers kind of defy schedules regularly, but it doesn't mean that you can't try to keep fitting them in. They're never going to take care of themselves. You're never going to have free time that suddenly turns up and you've got time to deal with these barrels. So build that right away. If it means that you're really interested in a barrel program, devote one day every month to just doing barrel work or whatever it ends up being. But build it in, because if you don't prioritize it, you'll never find the time to do it. So from the very beginning, I think you have to make it a priority, and you have to make your kind of paperwork work for you and make it something that you'll be able to grow into and really set up right, set up your foundations in the correct way, and you'll find it easier to move on to the next 10 barrels or 20 barrels or whatever I'm doing.
So we've gone from the most basic system to, I think, a very complex one. In the 6 years that I've been at Cascade, what we started with was just keg caps. I would suggest define the parameters that you want to know when you look at a barrel. For us, it's barrel filling and inoculation dates, Play-Doh, starting Play-Doh of the beer, as well as the Play-Doh of the beer going into the barrel, so that you can track it. Quick reference when you do your gravities later on in the aging process. Any fruit additions, sometimes if you do top your barrels, when it was last topped and with what. Those are some of the key batch information. What brew, what batch, or however you track your actual brew lengths. Have that on there for a quick reference guide. So define those parameters that you want to see on your barrel, and then what we actually did, at first we just used keg caps, and we would just write on them and staple them onto the barrels, and then once that barrel, and then if we added fruit, it got another cap, and if we did another addition of fruit, it got another cap, and then once we emptied that barrel, we would pull those caps off and just put them to the top of the barrel, so that's our history, and we could track the history like a rainbow across the head of the barrel, and then whatever's at the center of the barrel head was what the contents of the barrel was. Then we had a matching Excel spreadsheet that actually just took that exact same information, and same thing, date, Play-Doh, base beer, batch number, any additions, topping schedules, tasting notes, so that we could quickly, in an Excel sheet say, let's search all our blondes. Okay, here they are. Let's select these 12 and their respective barrel numbers, and then go find them or give them to our forklift driver, our cellar guys, to pull out and start tasting. So that's what we used to use for the longest time. We've since upgraded to a database system that I'm still learning on, so I'm don't know enough to tell you about it. But it's I would say that an Excel and some just simple tagging on your barrels is good for up to several hundred barrels.
I'd say, yeah, looking forward to using some sort of Excel program because we're just pulling barrels randomly now. We do have very weak records, and it's definitely a flaw. We've been trying to work on it, but as a lot of production breweries know that sometimes barrel aging and wood fermentation is secondary, which is a damn shame. But there's a demand for the rest of the beers, and these things usually don't have expected date releases, so a lot of these things get pushed behind. As Kyle said, try to make time for this stuff, and it's sometimes challenging, but you need to do it. And yeah, that's it.
A few more questions from me. Any best practices and tips on finishing and packaging barrel-aged beer?
It's I think the hardest question. I think we all probably have the same feeling as, we put these beers away for a while and then we come back to them and they're like, this is pretty cool, but I'm not sure if it's ready. I'm not sure if it's finished. And then you kind of have to make a guess. The best thing is, once you see, especially it's hard because I think we're often talking about two different things. If we're talking about like sack only beers that are aged in spirit barrels, I think the kind of packaging plan is fairly standard for most beers. You see it'll rest in its whiskey barrel or whatever for 3 months, and it's ready to be transferred into a bright or clarified or however you want to handle it, but transferred into a bright and then transferred into whatever packaging kind of options you want. Mixed culture beers are a little trickier. We all think that it'll be easy to prime and condition these beers. Depending on your acid level and your pH, you may find that's a lot more challenging than you think. And it's going to take a lot longer. Finding the right kind of packaging material can be really challenging. These beers that take a long time, you don't want to you can't put them in the same package as your other beers and still think that, we can command a new price when it looks exactly like your other beers. These things all require a lot of consideration. One of the things that I've been contending with in a lot of our beers is a tetrahydropyridines, and maybe this is new for some of you, but I'm sure some of you have tasted the Cheerios kind of weedy finish you get on some younger sour beers. It's a pretty common thing. It tends to age out, but it's a thing that you may not notice until you've already packaged it and you go, great, I've got a new bottle, it's going to be stale in our tasting room, next week. And then you crack open a bottle and it's suddenly, well, that wasn't there in the fermenter, or that wasn't there in the barrel. And you kind of go, okay, well, what's going to happen with this? And then you kind of have to sit on it, and hopefully in 1 month or 6 months or 12 months that goes away. But you kind of have to guess, and this is a thing that we all have to. You have to learn your process, and it's not going to be the same as your stainless steel production beers. So you can't assume that you can just apply the same rules from stainless back into your wood cellar. It's just going to be really different. So you just have to learn it as you go and ask questions. That's why we're here, I guess.
So we bottle condition all of our beers. We are looking for long-term ageability, and so we feel as though that process really mops up all of the oxygen that might be picked up during barrel aging, barrel transfers, tank transfers, and sending it through into the bottles. I always recommend, if you want your beer to last, doing some bottle conditioning. I know it's an extra hassle, but I think we've seen some of our beers, we have beers in our cellar that go back to 2007 that still taste really nice, and that's 10 years and going on some of our beers, so we're really pleased with that. I would say give yourself, one of two things. Do a light filter polish on your beer. I know that it doesn't need to be a very fine filtration, but if you are working with a lot of fruit, or you're working with a lot of particulate that's going to be difficult to separate, especially in barrel, some very coarse filtration helps. If you don't filter, that's okay. Give yourself, build your tank schedule around enough time to allow settling to occur. Chill your tank down, let it settle for a while. trying to avoid sediment in the bottom of your bottles, other than maybe just conditioning yeast. That's my suggestion. I think that's pretty much all I've got. Yeah.
Yeah, I just touch on the same thing. Like we'll usually blend the barrels into stainless and bottle out of there, and usually it's into our bright tanks, same tanks that we bottle our regular beers out of, and those usually been turned over a couple times a week. So we consciously try to give that beer a little more time than a standard beer in there, in order for it to kind of blend together, relax, let some of that turbidity or whatever may be in there to fall out. And then, yeah, we blend in bottle conditioning yeast before we package. We find that the Lallemand CBC yeast is very, very reliable, highly recommended. And yeah, that's it. We give the beer about 4 weeks minimum after packaging, and we'll taste it from there, and then usually cold condition before selling. But yeah.
Okay, so I don't have any more technical questions. I just have a couple more kind of personal interest questions for you guys that I wanted to ask that people might be interested in knowing. So, Kyle, for yourself, you relatively new to the role of Cellar Master at P49. Obviously, they have a program that's been developing over time. Where do you see it going under you?
I think what we'll see is, I think we've done a great job with our spirit barrel beers. I think you've probably seen some of them here and there, and I think those we've been really happy with those. Our mixed culture beers haven't really turned out maybe with the variety that we would like. We've had some successes and we've had some misses. What I'm hoping that we see in the next 6 months to the next year is a little more variety and a little more kind of built-in complexity. I'm hoping that eventually, so currently we've got about 350 barrels and 2 foeders, and probably operating at something like 35 to 40% full. So the first thing I'd like to do is fill all those barrels and start having some things to play with, some variety, some blending options, and see where that goes. So full barrels is actually the goal. That's the goal.
So moving down the panel there, Kevin, you made the jump in 2014 from Cascade Cellar Master to the lead blender. Tell me what that change was like and what it's been like being mentored by Ron Gansberg.
So the first part of that, being mentored by Ron Gansberg, that's really been one of the most meaningful and valuable relationships I've ever had in my life. He's a genius. He's and I mean, I'm not getting a raise out of saying any of this stuff. I assure you that.
Is he here?
He's not here. He's not here today. But he's somebody who's extraordinarily humble and extraordinarily unwilling to take credit for so many of the things that Cascade does, and yet the most masterful brewer blender that I've ever met. He will refuse the title brewmaster. He insists that the beer is our master, and you must be subservient to it. And if you do not, he will become very, very angry. But I think it's a great lesson to learn, and having worked with Ron will be something that will forever, be a part of my future in beer. The transition from Cellar Master to lead blender happened really, I would say, that coincided with our growth, a very stark growth pattern from, if you've been to the Cascade Barrel House, that's where we used to do all of our sour beer production. We maxed out there at about 400 or 500 oak barrels. And so we made a switch right around that time to a new facility just outside of Portland where we now can house up to 2,000 barrels. We've got 9 foeders and a lot of blending tanks. We also went from a staff of about 4 or 5 of us to a staff of 18 to 20. So in many ways, the shift in position, went from actually doing the blending and the tank cleaning and the barrel emptying to training and working with the staff who's doing that, and sort of taking a little bit more of an aerial view, which is a difficult step to do, to step away from the floor and do more planning and administrative duties as opposed to being out there yourself. It's a very, it takes a lot of relinquishing responsibilities, and trusting your staff and enabling them and empowering them to make their own decisions, guided by by the management staff. But it's been extraordinary, a huge learning curve for me to go from really managing a barrel cellar of about 400 to one of about 2,000. And I think everybody at Cascade has gone through this wild exponential growth in the last couple of years to just try to learn how to manage that. There is no book on this stuff. There is no real. There's a few that are starting to come out now, but you have to find your own way, and I think that's what we've tried to do, and we'll continue to. We have to every day try to make ourselves better. I mean, at no point do we allow ourselves to think that what we're doing is the best way of doing things. So, but yeah, it's. I think Ron's advice of never considering yourself a master of beer, but being a servant of beer is the best advice. Coming from him that anybody I think in this industry could get.
So, Brent, Four Winds started making barrel-aged beers relatively early out of the gate. And while some kind of ownership groups would have seen doing that, releasing barrel beers, making barrel-aged beers that early as a little bit of a risk, the release of your initial Saison Brett is now seen by many, myself included, as I wrote in Scout, as a key moment in the evolution of BC's beer scene. Describe the thinking behind that beer and tell us about making it.
I don't know. We got a little bit of a unique way to go about things at Four Winds, fortunately, because me being brewer and owner kind of just do what we want, which is a rare thing when there's money involved in business. I'm fortunate to work with my dad and my brothers, and they put a lot of trust into what I wanted to do. Neither of them or any of them had any experience in the beer industry. I was fortunate enough to spend 3 years at R&B Brewing before starting Four Winds. And it gave me a good experience in what's happening in the beer industry, but it also showed me what was missing. And I, at the time, was a home brewer, did a lot of beers with Brett culture, something that we never did at R&B at the time. And so I thought that the industry in BC was lacking a lot of funk and sour beers, and I knew that there would be a potential market for it. So regardless if this beer was going to sell, I decided our first batch that we ever brewed, I was going to split it into wood and add Brett. So we did our standard Saison, which we still brew every week. Half of the beer went into red wine barrels from Stag's Hollow in the Okanagan, which I went up to Stag's Hollow, met the wine master, and shook his hand, bought the barrels from him. It was a pretty unique experience, pretty awesome. He is a big fan of wild fermentation, and it's something he's not allowed to do as a winemaker at his winery, so he was very impressed that we were going to put beer and wild yeast inside the barrels that he previously had wine in. So he was a big fan of that. And so we brought the barrels back. It was a very simple process of taking the finished Saison beer. At the time, actually, I was in communication quite a bit with Sean, who's the former head brewer at the Commons. I went to school with him in Chicago, and he gave me some advice on what kind of pitch rates to do with barrel fermentation with Brett. And it was very much an experiment, as anyone who's ever worked with wood for the first time, and you're always wishful with it. After I think we gave it 6 months, it was hitting the flavor targets we were looking for, and we decided rather than release this beer in a standard package, we decided to do something special in the market, and we invested in a corker and a cager, and that was, I think, maybe one of the first beers in BC to do that. And it's nice now to see that that's happening regularly. I think these special beers that take time and lots of effort and thought need to have a unique package. And it's very proud of that beer when it came out, and also very proud of every time we make it. Yeah.
Nice. So one more question, and I understand we're running out of time, so this could be like, you guys I'm sure could go on for a super long time, but I wanted to ask one last kind of catch-all question. Tell me the thing you love most about making barrel-aged beer. Or just something you like about making barrel-aged beer that's unique, that really gets you going.
I love it because it's slow. We're pretty busy with our standard beers at Four Winds, and like I think our total production of wood and barrel-aged beers is below 5%. So when we get a chance to spend some time in the wood cellar and the barrel room, there's a sense of ease, there's a calmness about it, and that is rare, and it's really nice. And also, you really got to think about these beers when you're tasting them. It's not like a everyday sipper or everyday beer after work, and just, it's something that has complexities that you won't find regularly, and that also adds some calmness and a bit of meditation, and that's something that's crucial.
It's actually, that's yeah, you kind of nailed it, I think. It's something you get to think about. I think we probably have similar experiences in coming from places that are busy, that you have a lot on your plate at one time. So it's interesting to get time to think about something, and something that doesn't announce itself to you right away. You don't know. Sometimes, I'm sure we've all tasted barrels that we thought, I'm not sure what's happening here. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just something that you don't know what it is. So there's that sense of you have to figure it out. And I think that's the thing that I always find really exciting, is that you don't always know what to expect when you pull a nail from a barrel or pull a sample. So it's fun just to find something new that you started it off, but now it's something totally different.
Yeah, I think I would agree absolutely with what both of you guys said. I think a barrel cellar, there's a certain reverence to it. There's a certain gravity when you walk into a barrel cellar that, the barrel as a technology hasn't really changed very much in a very, very long time. So there's a connection with the process that you're doing and undertaking that has been going on. We've rediscovered it. We haven't uncovered anything. What do I want to say? There's a lot of innovation in this room. There's a lot of innovation in barrel aging, but that's been going on for a very, very long time. So you're part of a tradition that I think was lost for quite a long time, and it's great to see this renaissance. I think we're all very fortunate to be in this industry here and now. We're really in it. Like it's like Paris in the 20s or something, or like San Francisco in the 60s. It's like we're in it now. This is it. And I think that many, many years from now, people are going to look back on this era of brewing and be envious of where we are all. The benefit that we have to be doing what we're doing here and now. To speak specifically to what's great about barrel aging and working with barrels is that I've had a brief stint in some production brewing, and if you have a flagship beer or you have sales demands to meet, a lot of times it's turning the crank, and it's the same recipe again and again and again, day after day. With barrel aging and blending, you get one chance at a lot of things, and it's almost never to be replicated in the same way again. And your cycle on things, there are projects that we make once every 3 years, or we make once every 2 years, or once a year. And in that regard, you've learned so much since the last time you've done it that it's never going to be the same. And different barrels, different beers, different people, and that variability makes it this kind of very dynamic, living, breathing. That's the thing that's really where the art, I think, comes into meeting the science behind it. So it's a real privilege, and it's a philosophy and a vision rather than a set of parameters and targets.
Nice. Okay, so I obviously had a lot of questions, and I was a little bit greedy and indulgent and just kept asking them, but I do want to open up the floor because I'm sure you guys have as many questions as I do. There we go. So we're going to do the Ken Beatty method here, which is basically ask short questions because I'm going to repeat them. If you want to wax poetic, just come to the mic and I want to tell the story because I can't repeat it. So first question. Matt.
I got a question about fruiting. You guys talked about fruiting earlier in the presentation. So, what do you find better about doing whole fruit, raw fruit, like you picked recently, versus like an aseptic kind of puree? Do you find that there's something superior that it adds to the beer, to the wild yeast? What component of it is better?
Okay. Whole fruit versus an aseptic puree, and what is better? They got it? There you go.
The very quick answer is obviously depending where you're getting fruit, your whole fruit's going to be of vastly superior quality in the first place. Think about the fruit that ends up in a puree. It's definitely not the top pick of the orchard or wherever you're getting it. So that's in the very first place. Fresh fruit is going to be better quality, flat out.
To add to that very quickly, the puree that you're buying is the same puree that somebody's buying on the other coast, which is the same puree somebody's buying on the southern, part of the, U.S. or something. And if you want differentiate, I think there are some really amazing pureed fruit projects out there, but there's a homogenization to it that, if we all use the same puree, we're all going to have some similar undercurrent in all of our products. And so if you can kind of capture a region, you have things here that other people don't have in other areas. What are they? That's not just fruit, but microflora. How can you capture that and express it in a way that nobody else can do? And that's what's going to make the beer here. People need to come and try this beer here and nowhere else.
The other thing too that's beautiful about fresh fruit is typically you put a face and a name and a conversation to the farmer who grew it, and that just goes a little bit further with the product. And it's always nice to be able to visit a place and be like, this fruit that I use in my beer came from this farm, and this man or woman spent time growing this, and it's a great connection.
Very cool. Sure.
I know I come out of left field, but I know a lot of wineries in BC now are moving away from barrels and actually fermenting in concrete. Is that something that's on your radar down the road to experiment with and seeing what kind of flavor profile that's going to add or take away?
Okay, the move away from barrel aging to aging in concrete and the flavors that doing that impart on your beer.
I would love to try it. Don't really have it in the plans right now, but I did have the opportunity to try a concrete fermented saison at Tired Hands a couple of years ago, and the minerality in that beer was fantastic, and thought it was very unique. So maybe one day.
I think concrete is another, card up your sleeve. I don't know that it'll ever I don't think it'll ever compete with barrel aging, but I think that it's certainly worth having that as a tool. When I worked at a winery in the Willamette Valley, we did a Chardonnay fermentation. We took the same lot of Chardonnay juice. We did neutral barrel, stainless steel, and concrete fermentations, and then we did a blind tasting to vote on what we felt was the best result, and the concrete won by a large margin. And so I think that there's beautiful flavors and minerality that can be brought out of concrete. I'm going to get you on the line with our accountant after this, and you can tell him how important it is.
Okay, I think we have time for one
Sure,
more.
why not? Why not?
Yeah, one more question.
Just curious, based on what you guys have done so far, is there a barrel, a culture, or type of fruit? Is there something you guys haven't worked with yet, but really want to? So, does that make sense?
Yeah. Is there a barrel, a type of fruit, or a culture that they have not worked with that they would really like to?
There's a bit. You know what? I think one of the things that we haven't had an opportunity to work with would be kind of a wild culture from this side of the world from kind of our neighborhood. And that's something that we've been starting to trial and we're going to start looking at more closely. But that's definitely the next, I think kind of connects to what you were saying about kind of that putting a face to the name of your fruit and having a local expression of, you know, your fruit or your microflora, and actually having that microflora be the primary mover in a beer would be definitely high on my list of something I'd like to get into.
Yeah, I'll just second that and say that it's something that we want to do, and really nothing's in plans at this time, but spontaneous fermentation using whatever's in the air around us is a goal of ours, absolutely. But definitely no timeline right now.
Lychee nut, pomegranate, chestnut, acacia wood, spontaneous fermentation. There's a lot out there that concrete. Yeah, there's a lot out there that we'd love to do. You know, process considerations, money, time, all of those things are prohibitive. But there's an ongoing list, and I think that the combinations are just infinite. But for me, I think some of the alternative woods beyond oak, I think, are of great interest and require, you know, maybe a deeper look by the industry, see what else is out there that could work.
Nice. I think that means that all of us have a few things to look forward to from three of these guys. So I'd like to thank Kyle, Brent, and Kevin for taking the time with us today. Pretty amazing? Pretty damn amazing. And for sharing their beers with us. That was pretty cool. So that's it for the formal proceedings. I'm going to hand this over to Ken Beatty to wrap things up for the day.
I had this whole thought, no, stay right where you are. I had this whole thought that this would be, but that's not going to work, so there you go. That space right there. Wow. I got to tell you, this has been an amazing day for me and the board, and a lot of people who put a lot of effort into this. Thank you all so much for coming. We really are heartfelt appreciative of what we have been able to accomplish today. I think, as Carlos said, and I love this, we're the 20s of Paris in the 60s. That's because I'm a 60s guy, so that really resonated with me. As I said earlier this morning, we are in seats that no one sat in today. This is the first BC Craft Beer Conference, and people are going to be talking about this. When we were looking at legacy stuff here, and I'm very proud of everyone for attending. I want to thank all the suppliers and the vendors. Thank you so much. We had 32 suppliers. We actually turned away suppliers because we sold out. So that was awesome. We had 6 absolutely kick-ass seminars. The feedback, just walking around and asking people what they thought, has been immense. This was really super cool. Thank you very much. I'd like to just thank the executive board. We do have 7 board members. Mike Coghill from Yellow Dog, Adam Crandall from, they're all waving at each other, Adam Crandall with Moody Ales, Graham With, Parallel 49, Don Farian with Bomber, Gary Lindsay from Driftwood, Paul Hadfield who is not here. He's in charge of the tourism, so he decided to go on a tour to Portugal. Why not? His wife surprised him. And Matt Lockhart with Phillips Brewery for all their help in the last year, and really taking this in a meeting last November and saying, no, we're going to put this on and we're going to do this by ourselves, for ourselves. So I really appreciate that. There's a couple of other people I'd like to thank. I'd like to thank Blair and Bomber for making this incredible beer. When I'm walking through the lobby and Gary Lowen, who I have the utmost respect for, stops me and says, that's a kick-ass beer that he made. He really did a good job, and not he, because there was other people that helped them. So, and I wish I could
kind of go through that whole process, but it was so quick and so fast, and Dawn talked about it last night. We literally were told by the liquor board on Thursday we had a program, and we started the beer on Tuesday. Thanks. Is the liquor board left? Thanks. We'll get that for you. No need to worry. We're very good at this. And they also, I really wanted to point out to Bomber what they did. All those bags that you have on your backs with all that great swag in there and these great WorkSafe books, Bomber did that all yesterday. So thank you very much, Bomber Brewing. I really want to thank West Coast Canning for making the awful yearly AGM something that I think actually people will be going, hey, you going to the AGM next year? Let's do it. Because it, as we said, it broke into an Oktoberfest that broke into an AGM. So we had a lot of fun there last night. We are looking massively forward to socializing later tonight at Direct Tap in the warehouse of, what is it, Warehouse of Marvelous Delights? I'm tired. There we go. So we're very, very excited about that. So please, if you're, I hope you've all got your tickets for that. Most importantly, plan a safe ride home. Plan a safe ride home from here. I'd also like to acknowledge a couple of people who have blown me away, who I've known for a number of years, and I really didn't get the appreciation of what they do and how expert they are in their field. And the first is Monica Frost, Socially Monica. She's all over social network. Yeah, I know, okay, good. I'm hiding back here. I'm under the table now. What she did on social media to raise the awareness here was amazing. And this room is full in a large part to you, Monica. So thank you very much. We are technically not done. We still would like you to go back and drink some more beer at the, because we haven't had enough. I haven't. In the trade show, so it is open for about another 45 minutes. So please, if you're interested in going back there, it'd be really great for you to do that. And there is going to be some munchies, because I'm kind of hungry. So we'd like to do that. And then finally, I'd like to really pay my final thanks to Carlos Mendes, our beer lawyer, our outstanding host today. I think you did a marvelous job. You've always been kind of in the, not only the keeper of secrets, but the man in the shadows, the man behind the curtain. You might be the wizard. You may be the Wizard of Oz. So we thank you again for your generosity, your advice, and your time, and thanks very much for that. But there certainly is one person in this whole room who has made this the most easy thing I could have ever done, and that is Leah Hannigan from Thank You for Cascade. She's at the very back of the room. I don't think she'll come to the front of the room, but it would be very nice if she did. On the off chance you don't know who she is, I said last night, she is the calmest person. As you noticed from my incredible attention to detail, when people ask me a question longer than 7 words, I'm like, huh? And so things pop. My head is like a kind of Orville Redenbacher popcorn popper. It just constantly throws out things, and I'm like, Leah, we gotta do this. In fact, when we were about to start, I said, hey, can we put a slide on there that's got our logo? And she's like, are you kidding me right now? So she's put up with that for about 6 weeks. But you have absolutely, I don't know even what to say other than the only way I can do things, which is to give you a big hug. What I do know is we will see you all this time next year, because this thing is only going to get bigger and better. So thank you very much. Safe ride home. Go drink some more beer, eat some cheese, and some whatever else is going on back there. And we'll see you tonight. Thank you.